Curiosity leads us down the path less traveled. Paranormal M is where you'll find a community of fellow truth seekers, sharing and exploring real supernatural stories. Don't miss out on the adventure. Subscribe and turn on notifications today. Story number 1, Hat Man. I'd never heard of the Hat Man until I was describing to my oldest son this weird feeling I had of being watched. My home was built in 1984. I do know the previous owner's first husband died. Not sure if it was in the house. We're on 5 acres of woods. The house sits in the center of the property, and there's a 100-year-old cemetery that butts up to our backyard with 6 graves. We bought the place in 2017. I've always been sensitive, and I hear, smell, and sometimes see things, and many times how I pick up on spirits is feeling them and then seeing them in my mind's eye. A while back, I kept feeling that I was being watched, and what I saw in my mind's eye was a tall man wearing an old-fashioned hat. Think a hat worn by plague doctors. I mentioned to my son, and he got very concerned about the Hat Man. He advised me to not dwell on it. I don't know. He just couldn't articulate a reason, just a feeling. Within 6 months, our 9-year-old Rottweiler developed osteosarcoma. It was a very fast-growing cancer, and we had to have him put down. Rotties are very engaging with their people, and it broke our hearts. Since we have so much property, we found a pretty place and buried him there. I haven't felt Hat Man since. Spirit world ramping up. I come from a family who's always had paranormal experiences. My great-grandma, my grandma, and my dad have seen, heard, and smelled phantom things. And to us, it was a part of life. All but me, of course, have passed on. I have lots of stories and experiences that are strange or otherworldly, and I'm going to post them. This is the most recent. It happened over the weekend and last night and early this morning. I currently live in the South on 5 acres, and my backyard ends where a 100-year-old abandoned cemetery is. We also have a cleared area, surrounded by beautiful loblolly pines, live oak, and hog plums, where we've buried one of our dogs, and have planted a cedar tree, where we put my late mother-in-law's ashes. Husband and I also wanted to be cremated when we die, and a tree planted over our ashes as well. I don't know if the proximity is what sort of makes my experiences ramp up. Last weekend I was at the beach. I had started reading a book when I felt the distinct presence of someone standing directly behind me. Way in my personal space. I looked around and nothing. Went back to reading, and it happened again. I could almost see the shadow in my mind's eye because no shadow was cast. It kind of rattled me because it was so in my space, and I actually called my husband to make sure that he was okay. I gave up on reading and went for a swim. It didn't happen again after that. Last night I was sitting in a chair reading the news on my phone, and a gray mist passed in front of me. I was startled because while I occasionally don't feel alone, I've never seen anything. It disappeared as soon as we passed in front of me. This morning I woke up and I was laying in bed and I heard someone say hello. It was a woman's voice and came from the direction of the bedroom door. This happened at about 7 a.m. Swooshing noise. I'm quite experienced with hypnagogia. but I couldn't tell if it was this or was it something else. The fact it happened on Halloween is even weirder, and I wasn't experiencing any of the other hypnagogia stuff. Last night between 3 and 4 a.m., I was lying on my back, and I decided to lay on my side. After a few minutes of this, I heard a series of what I can only explain as irregular downdrafts of air. You know how an airplane makes a deep roaring noise as it goes overhead due to the action of wings forcing air down? It was like that, but like a slowly rotating helicopter blade or someone waving a sword above my bed. And all I was thinking was, what the hell is that? Please stop it. It stopped after a few times, and I looked around, but I couldn't find anything. I decided to lay on my back instead. Now I'm wondering what on earth this was. It seemed too real for hypnagogia. I can only think it was something with my ears. I did lose a radio underneath my bed earlier that night, but it was off, and not one that's easy to switch on, and the noise came from above. Strange and annoying low-frequency, rough rumbling noise in the middle of the night. Last night around 3 a.m., I noticed a very low background rumbling noise. It sounded like it was coming from the floor or the wall and wasn't uniform like a typical hum. It was very rough, like something vibrating or an engine rough idling. I can compare it to a classic car, a motor with a bad bearing or aircraft noise. It exhibited random pops and was almost like something moving. I was able to block the sound out by covering my ears. This noise actually caused me to lose 2 to 3 hours of sleep. I asked my parents, and they said they didn't hear anything. I can confirm that it wasn't a heating pump. That's way too uniform. The noise sounded lower than the typical 50 hertz hum, like 25 to 40 hertz. Around 5 or 6 a.m., it suddenly buzzed loudly and stopped. I do suffer from hypnagogia, but I could confirm that there and then that this noise was real, completely random and seemed to be from nowhere. At one point, it seemed to also make a hiss. This is really freaking me out because for the last few weeks I've been hearing strange noises near that wall like tapping. I've always assumed it was wind, and the flash of light I saw a few weeks ago, and a few days ago I was playing with a toy gun and found if I held it a certain way, it would start bobbing up and down on its own. I will appreciate any attempt at explanation. No, I don't have one. Well, I remember it was 4 years ago at night. It all started with watching the Ghost app on YouTube for fun, then watching them sponsoring the Ghost app that communicates with the paranormal. In a text message and highlights the shape, here I thought it's fake, because they were using it for an advertisement so that they can, make money off of that. So I did download the app that they recommended, installed them, points my phone around my room, then suddenly it's showing there is a ghost in my closet. The app was supposed to highlight the shape. However, the text only appeared as hi, as like it's trying to speak. I ignored it because I thought that app is fake, that living off the money, so I uninstalled it and then went to sleep. A few moments later, I felt like someone was watching me and my body getting colder under the blanket. I didn't open my eyes, but I felt that someone was near. My mind spoke to me like a person next, but I'm deaf. It was telling me to not put my feet out of the blanket as my feet urged me to get out. My feet stretched out of the blanket, then someone grabbed my feet, then dragged me out of my bed. That happened so quickly, so I grabbed something around me. The only thing that I could grab was a Chinese chopstick so I can stab someone that grabbed me. But I looked up, and there was nobody in the room except me. I reckon it tried to grab me toward the closet. After everything happened, I just realized that they don't need to cast a spell on everything like Ouija boards. When we call anything that relates to ghosts, it's like we can summon them through the item. I admitted this did freak me out. If anyone asks me to play with the occult, then I would decline politely, because those things can be ending up horrific like Ouija boards. I'm done with the occult and vow that I'll never go back, ever. Okay, I'm not a cop, but I had to share this experience that turned me into a believer. A couple of months later, a friend was dining out explaining my story when a stranger at the next table turned around and stated that something similar had happened to him at the exact same place. This place, the Lyman School for Boys, Westboro, Massachusetts Mental Hospital, whatever you want to call it, is known to be severely haunted. But I didn't believe that crap, no way. So I go there to have a couple drinks with a friend. We get into an argument. He leaves. Buzzed me, decided to light a fire about a quarter mile from the crematorium, alone, at 2 a.m. I grab some sticks and leaves and start walking down a small access road with a pump house. It's at a reservoir. This is where it begins. All of a sudden, I notice this strange white outline. First indistinguishable, right under a light. I assumed it was Flint, and moved back and forth across the road trying to see. As I get closer, it looks like a woman in white with white hair flipped forward over her face. My heart skips a beat, but as I move closer, it vanishes into thin air as I'm staring at it. Not blinking at all. I try to ignore it, but I'm shaken. About 15 feet after the boathouse, there's a narrow path that leads to the clearing. As I hit this, the temperature drops noticeably. I had recalled a friend bringing this up at the same point a year earlier during daytime, and moved on. But even more so on edge, hairs on my neck standing up, mind screaming. As I get 2/3 down, I hear this piercing shriek, and a squirrel bolts directly, less than a foot in front of me, and I jump back in terror. This was so generic scary movie pre-scare that I'd actually tried to use it as a so fake there's no way there's a real spirit here, in quotes. But at this point, I was terrified but wouldn't turn around, as it would require me admitting that there were spirits. I get to the water and stand there, feeling a presence. I look to the path I walked in on, and it completely fogged up in a matter of less than 30 seconds. At this point, I'm ready to get out of here, but standing in disbelief looking at the water for a moment. At which point, I hear this dry, piercing whisper coming from all around me. All it said was, "Out." I took that to mean, "Get out." Immediately dropped my fire-making supplies and sped walk out. Then all of a sudden, I heard footsteps following me. I stopped. They stopped. I continued. They continued. I ran. Haven't been back to that place since, and any time my friends ask me to go there, I tell them, "Whoop, no." After this had happened, a friend recalled a time that they were skinny dipping at the same clearing, and a girl that we were with went completely limp in the water, eyes rolled back. I dragged her to shore. Her and I were the last ones out there, and she was deepest. I checked her pulse. She was fine. She was just staring at the sky with a blank expression, all of us nude as fuck. When she came back, she had zero recollection. She chalked it up to her being an attention whore, but after my experience, I have a hard time thinking something else wasn't at play. When I first bought my old house, I had to have extremely annoying housemates to help pay the bills. One night, me and a housemate number 1 were sitting on opposite sides of the lounge room watching the TV when I heard the unmistakable sound of knuckles on glass. Knock, 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 in short succession. The sound seemed to come from the window behind the TV. Housemate number 1 and I looked at each other. "Someone is knocking on the window," he said, looking at the window behind the TV. "Must be number 2 housemate," I said. We continued watching the TV. Next commercial break, I got a torch to investigate. I tried to walk down the side of the house, but it was a solid mesh of spider webs because nobody ever went there. Like solid. You couldn't even chuck a tennis ball through without hitting one. I got a stick and cleared my way through the window. Then I shone the torch down the opposite end. It too was a solid mesh of spider webs. There was no way anyone could have walked through there. But me and number 1 housemate both heard the sound and both agreed it was coming from a window that was between the 2 of us. The other rooms had windows too, but we both agreed it was coming from the window closest to us. If it was the other room, it would have been closer to one of us, and the sound wouldn't have appeared to come from another room, not the room that we were in. The sound did not come from the TV. It was an old rank arena TV that didn't make any sound, that could be mistaken for reality, and the knocking did not fit into the context of the show that we were watching. There was a bush next to the window, but it's a bushy bush, and there were no branches or wind to push it against the window. The next door neighbor couldn't have reached the window as the fence is over 3 meters away, and the neighbor was an old man who was not into practical jokes. It wasn't the sound of a bird. We both agreed that it was the distinctive sound of knuckles knocking. Besides, a bird hitting a window makes a single thump noise. It's been 10 years since I bought the 1920s house. I haven't heard the sound before or since. Nothing else unexplainable has happened. Mine's potentially lame compared to other stories, but it applies. My wife is a believer and claims to often see ghosts. Her whole family do. There's been the occasional thing happen that I couldn't explain away. I eventually asked her to stop telling me if she saw things because it freaked me out a little bit. On a European holiday, we stayed at an agritourism type place in the middle of nowhere, half of an hour away from the town that we were supposedly visiting. Something about the place was very uncomfortable, even though it was comfortable. Bed was fine, room a decent size. It just didn't feel right. My mind wouldn't shut down, especially at night, and I struggled to sleep. The second or third night in, I was struggling to sleep still. My wife slept, though. Then everything went a bit weird. Kind of felt like a dream, but it wasn't. It also felt like hallucinating. But I knew it wasn't, because that's something I'd experienced before. It wasn't night terrors either. I get those, and I'm used to them, so understand when it's happening to me. And they're scary. But the room slowly filled with cats. They were gathering around my bed. And then people started appearing, standing around my bed, trying to talk to me. I say trying because they were saying stuff in English that I understood, but had no context to which I could comment or reply. They didn't get annoyed or agitated, they just acknowledged each other, tried to talk to me, individually came and went a few times. It only happened for a short amount of time, confused me rather than scared me, and the next thing I knew, I woke up and it was morning. I was happy to put it down to sleep problems, I guess, until I said to my wife that I thought I saw weird things in the night and wasn't sure if it was a dream. She asked if it was a cat, I told her that it was more than one cat. She was shocked and asked me if there were people too. I said, yeah, lots. And they were trying to talk to me. She was almost excited to explain that she'd been freaked out by how many ghosts she sensed being there, but didn't say anything because I asked her not to. She doesn't claim to be able to communicate with spirits, but she says that they're often aware of the fact that she is aware of them. But this time she felt as though she couldn't see her, or they couldn't see her. Even though they were interested in something in our room, she concluded that those spirits wanted something from me. The event made me reevaluate a few things. For example, when I get tired, like really, really tired to the point of, fighting to stay awake, I see things, shadows in the corner of my vision. I've often interpreted these visions as a cat, always the same one. My wife believes there's a cat spirit with me, and has thought that long before this event. Maybe when I get tired enough, I see it. I now can't outright deny the possibility. My home we bought is haunted. And it's been interesting, because I'm an astrophysicist by trade, and it's been interesting to take what I know to be true in the universe and place that with what me and my family live with. All that being said, we adore her. I had probably the friendliest, most helpful ghost in the world. When we bought the house, we knew it was funky. Even weirder is 3 days after we moved in, I realized that I had seen this house before from the angle I was sitting on my couch. And it was in my dreams over various years. Anyways, the first thing we noticed was little things. If we left lights on, they would switch off. You would hear the click of the switch. I heard walking around in my son's room one day. Didn't think anything of it for a full 20 minutes, and then realized, fuck, I'm home alone. Like I heard this door open and walking around. Okay, spooky but harmless. If we lose something, and we audibly say it's missing within around half a day, it'll be found in plain sight on a table or a couch. We always say, thank you. Our cats will arch up and purr like someone's petting them. My daughter's been tucked in before. She thought it was me. Nope. We love her. The only thing we have issues with is no laundry machines past 9 p.m. We have front locking loaders. Once they're started, it's a bitch to get them open. If someone starts late, you'll come down to the door open and the machine off. Only past 9. So now we just respect it. I don't know who she is, but this is her home too. We love her and we say thank you and talk to her. All of us do. Guests have told us her house is haunted without us telling them. My all-time favorite story is I have a friend who doesn't believe in ghosts, and she spent the whole day talking mad shit. She retires to one of the guest rooms, and within 20 minutes she comes down sobbing, and her ear is bright red. She was half asleep and she heard soft movements, and the whack, someone flicked her ear. She doesn't talk shit anymore, or stay over. That's the only time our lady's been aggressive, but I'm glad she's here. She and our family now is kind of creepy and weird and dumb as that sounds. She's our family. I saw a strange pale creature with backwards legs on my way home from work. So I don't typically believe in this kind of stuff, but I had a strange encounter a while back that I was telling my coworker about, and they insisted that I saw a rake. I've been doing some research since, and I had no idea what it was, and it looks very similar to what I saw. Anyway, I was driving home from work at 1:30 a.m. about 2 months ago and was headed down this typically busy side street. Except since it was late, There wasn't a lot of traffic, just a Jeep in front of me. As I was driving around a bend in the road, I saw in my peripheral this figure to my right by a sidewalk standing between two small trees held up by wire supports. The creature was standing kind of behind them. At first, I thought it was just a big, slender dog, like a white greyhound or a Great Dane that escaped, and seemed to be standing and barking at traffic by the sidewalk. I only noticed it as I began to pass it, but as I passed by, I quickly noticed that it appeared to have a humanoid-shaped head with black eyes, a hunched back posterior, and a long, stretched mouth like it was screaming. I was going about 45 miles an hour when I passed, and it was dark out. I thought to myself, yo, what the fuck was that? So I slowed down quickly to look back, and in my mirror I saw the creature turn around and run toward the wood fence. But as it ran, I saw how tall and slender the creature was. It seemed pale with a kind of anorexic appearance. It moved strangely, and its leg joints were inverted and bent in opposite directions. At that point, I was seriously creeped out. The Jeep in front of me also slowed down, so I could only assume that they saw it too. We both kept driving as it was late and couldn't stop in the middle of the road. But that situation really made my skin crawl. I kept checking my mirrors for the rest of the drive home and debated if I should have called a non-emergency line to have an officer check it out, but I told myself that they would think I was an idiot. Now, every night when I take that road, I look around to see if I can spot it again. I really want to believe that it was just a dog, but I can't stop thinking about how strangely it moved with its backwards knees. I haven't talked about this much, except to my coworker, because quite frankly, it sounds ridiculous. I'm just wondering what the fuck I actually saw, and if it's something that I should even be talking about, or if I should continue to pretend that I never saw anything and just move on with my life. Please be kind. About 3 years ago, we had started working from home due to COVID. It was around June. I took my lunch at the usual time around noon. I would go outside to get some sun and watch my son play out. Unlike most days, this time outside was quiet. No kids were out. The sun was shining, but there was zero wind. A lady was sitting by the benches, where you sit to eat. I noticed her because she was the only one out there. She was facing my direction with her to the table. My son wanted me to record him, which I was. And at some point, I hear something, and my eyes, being stuck to my screen, noticed my son looking toward the benches. He had stopped doing his ninja moves and looked confused. I stopped recording, and in a moment, a black lady was walking towards us. She walked behind, around my son, stood there. Now I will describe her. The white part of her eyes were yellow. Her teeth were yellow. And when I say yellow, yellow, yellow. She had this smile, like petrified, like emotionless. She was wearing this dress/rope and matching turban. The fabric was white with a lilac color, very small geometric pattern. She said, "Take a picture." I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "Take a picture," while she showed me something in her hand that looked like a AA, like a very old phone. I'm not really sure. I thought that it was weird, but I agreed. I pulled my phone that at this point was locked. I put it in front, and there it was. She was not on my phone. My son was there standing alone in the phone. I felt paralyzed. It took a second, and I just looked. She was there, but yet not on my phone. I saw my surroundings melt almost like a movie. I slowly got near my son that was next to her. I ran so fast I looked back 2 times. She didn't even blink. She was there with her frozen smile looking at me. watching me run completely terrified. Couldn't speak for about 30 minutes. I remember thinking in my head that I'd lost my mind. My other 2 kids and sister were home, and I could only repeat, she was there, and she wasn't there. Had my first paranormal experience. So I'm a Scottish nurse. I qualified in October last year. I've worked in all kinds of places before, mental health, acute illness, even palliative care. And I have never had an experience like this. I have over 6 years experience in care and a year experience as a registered nurse. I started my job in mental health setting for older adults. Most of my patients have dementia. We don't have a lot of patients, and at this time we had 7. As a result of this, you really get to know your patients. You grow unusually close to them, as they're there for a long time and you spend a lot of time with them. Not the usual in and out that happens in most places. I happened to complete my final nursing placement in this clinical area and then took a job. There was a patient. Let's call her Rosie. Rosie was a 70-year-old woman who didn't have a diagnosis of dementia. In fact, she was the only patient who didn't. Rosie was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and emotionally unstable. They also queried Wernicke's disease, as she had a previous history of alcoholism. Rosie had ongoing issues with her family. She was a lonely woman, and her story really breaks my heart. She could be very demanding of nurse staff's time and attention, and could also be emotionally abusive towards them. Regardless of this, we cared for her day in and day out, as you do when you're a nurse. Rosie was hard work, I won't lie. But she had been in this ward a long time, and we all grew to really love her. We were kind of the only people that she had to talk to. And call it inappropriate if you like, but we grew more like family and friends than patient and nurse. Of course, her nursing care was our priority, and we took care of her to a high standard, but we all just kind of viewed her as our communal crazy aunt. She had a very distinct high-pitched voice that I'll probably never forget, and she would constantly shout for a nurse in her bed, or from wherever she was, "Nurse, nurse, nurse!" over and over and over. Or sometimes she would call out our individual names, if she had a preference for who she wanted to see. Anyway, enough background. Rosie sadly and suddenly took very unwell last week. She had a bowel perforation which led to sepsis and kidney failure, and she died the day after she was transferred to another hospital. I was brokenhearted that she never died with us around her. We did really love her. She is sorely, sorely missed. Rosie died on the Tuesday that I wasn't back to work until that Wednesday. I really didn't think she would have died, and I never went to see her in the hospital because I was on my day off. I regret this, but she's gone now, and there's nothing I can do about it. We all miss her, and we're all very sad that she has died. I went back to work on Wednesday, and there was a feeling that I couldn't shake all day. I can't explain it, but I could just feel something. I chatted to Rosie all day, both in my head and out loud, while I sort of pottered about her room, or just as I was working. I told her that I missed her, and I wished that I could just talk with her one last time. Later on in the day, her daughter called the ward and asked if Rosie happened to have any rosary beads that we'd be able to pick up and put into her coffin. I said that her stuff had been packed away, but I'd go look through all of it and call back. I went to the storeroom and rummaged through the bags, and I couldn't see anything, so I decided to take everything out of the bags one by one, so that way I wouldn't miss them if they were there. Nothing. So I spoke out loud. "Rosie, it's a shame that you had so many sets of rosary beads, and you can't give these girls a set to put in your coffin. Come on, show me where they are." I looked around and still nothing, so I went back to the phone and called her daughter. I told them I was really sorry, but I couldn't find any rosary beads. I did, however, find holy water and a picture of St. Jude. Once I came off the phone, I went back to the store cupboard, and what is right in front of my eyes sitting on top of the bag? I had just re-put all the stuff away, but the set of rosary beads. My first thought was, oh my God, Rosie listened to me. However, as time passed, I started to think it was just a trick of my eyes, and I just never noticed them. However, when I told the story to my colleague, who had packed all of her stuff away the day before, she had a shocked and confused look on her face and told me that she couldn't believe the rosary beads were lying on top of the bag, because she had put all of her quote-unquote holy things in the box in a cupboard, and I had no idea that the box was even there, and therefore never looked in it. When she showed me the box, she showed me the checklist that she had wrote of all of the items that she packed away, where they were, so that way we knew what she had and didn't leave them and to give the rest back. However, I didn't know this time, or I didn't know this at the time, and I started to believe, I've just not seen him. As a result of this, I spoke out to her again, and I said, Rosie, if you're really there, and that was you, and death isn't just blackness, please send me a sign that I can't afford to, fob off as a trick of the light. But please, whatever you do, don't scare me. About an hour passes, and I'm sitting, just writing up my nursing notes on the computer next to her old room, and all I hear is, "Nurse," in her voice. It was her voice, as clear as day. I looked over my shoulder into her room without hesitation because for a second I forgot she was dead. It clicked and every hair on my body stood to attention. I slowly turned my head to the hall and saw my colleague backing out of the treatment room, white as a ghost, as she uttered, absolutely terrified, "Did you just hear that?" And we both said at the exact same time without discussing it, "Nurse." I haven't stopped thinking about it since it happened. Does anyone have an experience with this? Does this mean that Rosie's stuck there? I don't want that for her. She wasn't happy there, and she was lonely. I don't feel her presence here so much now. A few days have passed, but I can't stop thinking about it. My eyes are totally open to a whole new world, and I need to know more. I've experienced seeing a doppelganger of my sister's twice. My uncle visiting us during the holidays more than once asked if we were standing near the cage of my mom's birds, and my sisters and I say no, because we're all watching TV, usually during late afternoon hours. What really shocked me to the core was seeing a doppelganger of my sister, and I chased it. I don't quite remember why I was being loud and making a ruckus in the house as a spoiled third grader, but I do remember it as something to do with my sister and her bracelet. It was time to eat lunch. My sisters were nowhere to be found, and I was pissed. I went outside and started calling my sister's name. I hear someone answer in the kitchen, but my sister suddenly ran away from me and went straight to the bird cages and behind the house. I was very angry at this and started running after her. But what was strange was no matter how long I ran, it seemed like I was stuck in the same position I was standing before I ran. It was like the cement I stood on stretched and stretched while my sister, quote unquote, ran with her back facing me without moving from her position as well. I was confused by this and soon ran out of breath. When I stopped suddenly, I snapped out of it, and my sister finally started moving from her place and disappeared behind her house. Funny thing was, I keep saying my sister's name, and my sister's voice from the kitchen was no way my sister that went through that wall. My real sister and my other sister were both in the kitchen. My mom got to caretake a really old castle keep, 14th century. The previous owner had died, and the family wanted to make sure vandals didn't get it. The previous owner was really old, so the building was in very basic living conditions, i.e., no kitchen, dodgy electrics. Obviously, it was the build, so it had so much history. It was officially logged with 3 ghosts. We believed there's more than 11. The night we moved in, my mom decided that she wanted to get pictures up as the cats are assholes, and she didn't really want them broken. The next morning, all the pictures had been swapped about. We left them as they were. I heard a huge fight, throwing of plates. I crept downstairs, wondering who was having such a huge fight. My mom was on her computer and looked confused when I asked her who was fighting. I was the only one who heard it, apparently. In the stables, there was a horrible presence. It grabbed my sister, and she came back inside and started yelling at my brother at his prank. We were both cooking together. We got an electricity bill that would rival a large hotel. Since we only used a few rooms and heated with gas, we complained. The electric company sent a guy, and he said he had no idea where it went. We lived in the middle of nowhere. Stealing from us wasn't possible. Interesting thing is, when we moved out, the family renovated the building. After that, no more paranormal experiences were had. I honestly believe all the strange things that happened. So much on a daily basis that maybe it fed on the electricity, or it was amplified somehow. Ask Reddit. Several occasions I used to see things and experience stuff, but as I got older and more in control, I learned to block, so I experienced it less and less. Grandparents' house had a basement with a crawl space. My grandfather would go in there and move all of our stuff the previous owners had in there. I'd only go inside the crawl space when my grandpa was in it. He actually sealed it off so I wouldn't go in by myself. The crawl space was a small walk space that opened up to a small room, high enough for me to stand in. The odd thing is, the crawl space had another doorway that led into another room that was actually more spacious and had lots of small furniture, like a crib, a play table, and a bouncy horse. There was even a small cabinet and bowl that I remember. This bed frame that was small and had no mattress, but had its mesh on it where the mattress pad should go. My grandpa didn't go into that room and would shoo me out. It was stuff left behind by previous owners. I was 4 years old when I had made a friend, a little girl named Rachel. She was my age and always wore a yellow dress with a white apron, and she had a ribbon in her hair like a headband. She didn't talk much, but we played often in the basement and in her backyard. She would talk, but only in whispers. We would go to a corner or hide behind furniture. She didn't like to go near the crawl space. She was kind of afraid of it. One day I tried to convince her it was safe by going inside myself. I went in and thought to show her the room with all the kid-sized furniture. She grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the room, shaking her head, eyes wide. Something jerked me back away from her. I looked back. It was a man with long, dirty fingers and wild hair, covered head to toe in dirt. And when he smiled, it was all fangs. Ran out of the crawl space screaming, into the backyard. When my grandpa came rushing up to me, I explained what we saw. He went into the crawl space with a determined look, then pulled out all of the junk in that room and aired them out into the sun. He then packed that room with insulation and boarded it up. I never saw the man again. But I also never saw Rachel. In fact, my family never had seen her. They say she was my imaginary friend, and I began to believe it. It wasn't until my 20s when my uncle revealed that when he used to babysit me, he once heard me talking to Rachel, and when he glanced over, he did see me talking to an outline of a girl glowing in a yellow dress. 2. When I was 10 years old, one of my houses my parents and I had moved into had a basement, and it was deep under the house. It covered the whole floor plan. My mom would go do laundry down there and would often notice all my old toys scattered on the floor from the storage boxes. She'd assume that I was downstairs playing with them and call me to go pick them up. I would, but I didn't play with these toys. They were all old, and I was always outside riding my bike with my neighbors. My mom figured out that it wasn't me spreading out the toys when she saw the old tricycle moving by itself as she was loading clothes into the dryer. And I wasn't in the basement with her. She just said in her best mom voice, "Don't try to scare me down here." And the tricycle stopped. I came face to face with the ghost when I woke up one night in my bedroom to find a little boy kneeling beside my bed and staring at me. He had his forearms resting on the mattress and was like leaning his head on the side of one of his forearms. I first thought that it was one of my cousins who's around the same age, so I sleepily say, "Hey, you come to sleep over?" When the kid didn't say anything and just kept staring, I leaned my face in real close, as in nose to nose close. That's when I saw that there were no whites in his eyes, and I could kind of see through him. I pulled away and then hid underneath my covers. We moved out shortly after. 3. 12 years old. Brand new house. Sitting at the dinner table with parents. Stepdad starts to go to hit me with his elbow, so I flinch. And when I was smaller, he used to try to rip my face off. But since I was bigger, he just intimidated me with the fear of a potential beating. My mom was sitting across from me and sort of massaging her forehead. I could tell that he was talking shit to her, but she wasn't really taking the bait. It angered me. His voice, her silence, our whole situation. I could see my mom beginning to unravel, though, and she let out this sudden growl or roar, and at the same time I felt something hot like a curling iron close to the scalp, and several plates, including his, shattered. Nice thick cracks. He quieted down. He touched my plate and the other one that wasn't broken. Then he got up, still mumbling, but I heard the breaking in his voice. I looked at my mom, but she ignored what happened, so I did too. 13 years old, in a different country. Neighbors found a spirit board. We began to play with it. I admit to making it move the first couple of tries. By midnight, the thing was vibrating underneath our fingers and moving even when we were half awake. It spelled out, "Come back to me." When I asked in a teenage girly fashion which guy was the most interested in me and why he was thinking about me, I didn't realize at the time that my real father, the estranged one, was looking for me and was still pinned to be reunited with me and my mom. We were 20 years later. When the gossipy girls began to use the board, the tone changed to threatening, but it calmed when I used it. It's not something I would touch again, honestly. 5. High school and college, 16 to 17 years old. I began to have flashes of things about people around me. I kept seeing things like a classmate talking to a man that I didn't recognize, and I finally asked her about it. She admitted that she was seeing a boy off campus, and he was older. I began to turn into some parlor trick. At parties, I would have people gather around and I'd read them, usually seeing a scene that they recently experienced that I wasn't present to witness, but they would always confirm that it happened. Then I started seeing things about my friends, but they couldn't confirm. I saw one friend with a guy that she didn't recognize, and I saw her pregnant, but she had no boyfriend and wasn't pregnant. Then I saw my best friend with this guy on a boat, and we both knew that she wasn't dating and couldn't swim. so I began to think that I was losing my touch and stopped. We graduated college a couple of years later. The girl that wasn't pregnant, she graduated 5 months pregnant and was engaged to the guy who moved in the same boarding house. My best friend wound up meeting her husband on a ferry. He won her over by promising to jump in after her if she fell off the boat. 20 to 21 years old. While the plane I was on was descending toward LAX, I looked out the window and vividly saw a giant city made of black mist looming over the city on the ground. I first thought it was smog or rain clouds, but the shapes were too angular and too condensed together, and the sunlight reflected on the surfaces very sharply. It looked like a giant stony skyscraper landscape. I still try to search for it again, but I can't see it anymore. But I'm pretty sure it was there. I wish I had the presence of mind to take a picture of it. 7. When I first moved to California, I visited Colorado with the family. I visited Coronado with the family. We walked through this fancy hotel. My cousins were leaning over a railing, overlooking a pool, and I was walking over to them to stand by them. I was gazing at the pool as I walked over, and I saw a tall, slender woman in this giant black sun hat and black lace robe at the end of the pool. As I drew nearer to the railing, she had slipped into the pool and began moving across the water like she was going through it. But it was odd because she wasn't moving her arms or swimming. When I reached the railing, I asked my cousins if they thought the lady was swimming weird. They asked, "What lady?" The pool was empty to them, but I saw the lady by the edge of the pool again, kind of lurking over it. Come to find out, the Hotel Coronado is famously haunted. 8. I tend to avoid looking into people's eyes too intensely because I still got flashes of scenes. The last one happened during a job interview, and I saw the lady interviewing me in a flash scene. She was going at it with another man on her desk. The man was not the dude in her family picture, so I developed blocking stuff now that I think, or I've grown out of it. I used to read tarot cards, and the flashes come out that way, I think. I've seen pregnancies, grieving death, divorce, increased income, major life changes. I don't do it so much now, because the last reading I saw the passing of a loved one, who turned out to be my grandpa, but didn't want to interpret as that, and it happened anyway. Ask Reddit. I lived in a 120 or so year old house that was on its last legs when me, my mom, and little sister all moved in. We never learned a lot about its history, but now I wish we had looked into it more before we left. It had to be interesting. It was a basic 2-story house which had a hallway leading from the kitchen to the bedrooms, with the living room doorway being about halfway between both. And I very distinctly remember one day when I was playing with my PlayStation in the living room that I heard a bedroom door creak a little bit. I didn't think much of it because the house was very noisy and I was kind of used to it. A second afterwards, I saw my mom walk down the hallway and brush past the coats that we had hanging on the wall. They all moved back and forth a little bit. What caught my eye was that she was wearing some sort of dress. Looking back now, it was more like an old-fashioned nightgown than anything, and I was wondering where she would be going dressed like that in the middle of the day. It was probably around noon at the time, so I yell for her not to be, getting off of my game, but when she doesn't reply, I hop up and run to the kitchen, turn the corner talking to her, freezing in my tracks when I see the kitchen is empty. I sit there for a split second trying to understand what happened, when I remember that my mom was working today. She had been at work for hours and my sister at school. I took a sick day off and I was home alone. It made my blood run cold standing there even though it was a bright sunny day. I wasn't a very gullible person when I was younger. I was very skeptical in nature and would often argue with my mom when she claimed the paranormal as reasons for noises and such. And I was not so young to misinterpret the memory. I was about a freshman in high school when this happened. And this was not a lone event. I had a friend from school who was over one day and experienced something similar. We were there watching my little sister. He didn't get specific with what he saw or heard, but whatever it was caused him to walk out of the house and walk home, which was probably a 45-minute walk. He refused to come back for weeks after I told him my story, too. And it still brings it up to this day. The last impactful story I remember right now happened to a family friend. I was in the hospital for a few weeks, and while I was there, my dog was alone at the house. Something I should point out is that the house hadn't been cleaned out in years. There were trinkets and furniture in that house that were there when the landlord purchased it in the 70s and 80s. And the basement had newspapers dated from the 50s and some even earlier in a big messy pile. We never cleaned it out because we actually found a lot of those items interesting. So when I was away, we had a family friend that lived nearby go to the house and feed our dog. And when she went, she saw the dog and noticed that he was distracted by something else. Then she heard the music. She swears to this day that she heard jazz music playing and someone humming for a few seconds after walking in. When I went home, she went back to reenact the scene. And when we went upstairs to where the dog's food would have been, she noticed something that she hadn't before. There was a desk sitting in the corner with a pile of old jazz records sitting on it. They all hadn't been touched in years and had dust on them. We mostly used the upstairs for storage since it was so cluttered anyways. But after that, she never came back to that house. So wasn't a house, but worked in a haunted movie theater back when I was in college. Had a whole history. The building was a storage for circus animals in winter during the off-season. Burnt down. Got turned into a classical theater. Got bought out and turned into a single-screen movie theater. Later remodeled into a 4-screen theater, which was its incarnation when I started working there. Apparently 2 people had died there. One suicide, the other accident. You had the run-of-the-mill stories. Well, so-and-so was closing and all of a sudden the bathroom stall doors started opening and closing all on their own violently. Manager swore seeing a guy trying to hide between the last row of seats and the wall during the last walk. You couldn't fit a hand into that space, not less a grown man. You'd hear faint voices, stuff like that. The front theaters closest to the lobby were fine, but it was the back pair that were the issue, because you would go in and start cleaning and immediately feel like someone was watching you. So theater on the right, I'd call Joe, and theater on the left, I'd call Paul. "Morning, Joe. Just sweeping up. Man, this is a bad movie, huh?" Stuff like that. Joe was fine. Just wanted to hello and the place would feel fine. Paul was the asshole that'd leave the hair on the back of your neck up or have you trip on nothing at all, and you just have to get into the habit of telling Paul to behave out of instinct. Worst encounter I ever had was doing my usher thing, sweeping up after the last show of the night. I'm by myself in the theater. Projection guy hasn't made his way to the booth yet. Manager was counting the till in the office. Other closer is getting concessions stocked up front. So it's still low lights after the credits, music is off, and all of a sudden, it feels like someone is creeping up behind me. Don't hear anything, still sweeping, and bam, I get a jolt like when someone grabs you from behind and digs their fingers hard into your ribs, like that gotcha kind of thing. I whip up the middle row by myself, pretty much go fuck this, drop the broom and bin, and just sprinted out of the theater up the hall to the lobby. Was too freaked out to check for marks, but I remember it felt like fingers digging into my sides. I guess my telling him to behave was taken as a, "Okay, smartass, let me give you a reason as to why you need to tell me to behave," kind of thing. I refused to clean that theater solo, I'd only do it if the projection guy was in the booth or the other closer was with me. Ask Reddit. Living in one right now. We moved in around 20 years ago. I moved out for about 5 years and nothing happened to me then. I moved back and more shit's been happening since we started to renovate. But we're so used to things happening that we treat them like a child misbehaving for the most part. I'll start with the things that happened when I was younger. I was in the basement on my PC, chatting it up in the days of AIM and ICQ. Something grabbed my ponytail and violently jerked it so that my head snapped backwards. I thought it was my dad, as he was the sort to sneak up on you if you were engrossed or something like that. I jumped out of my chair and tried to yell at him, but nobody was there. I looked at the time and realized I was home alone, as my sister was out, my mom was at bingo, and my dad was still working in the oil fields up north. I snapped at the ghost to not do that again, but still made sure I turned on a few more lights. We have no air conditioning, so even though my bedroom is on the main floor, in the summers my sister and I would sleep in the basement because it was cooler. One night I'm on the couch and my sister's on the guest bed. I'm struggling to fall asleep, tossing and turning, so around 2 a.m. I roll over, annoyed, and I see a white, misty human shape near the foot of the stairs. I wear glasses, so I thought maybe it was just blurry eye gunk or something got in my eye. I try to rub them and clear them, and when I open them, the misty form is about 6 feet closer than it was before. I thought, fuck that. Rolled over to face the wall and shut my eyes, didn't move until I fell asleep. There's a path that leads from the front around the side to the back of the house. There's also a gate that makes a distinct noise when the metal latch sort of catches. If we hear it, we know someone's here, so we can look out the windows to see who it is. Numerous times we've heard the latch and looked and seen no one on the other side of the house. It's even creepier in winter when there's fresh snow. We'll hear the crunch of footsteps in the snow, then the latch. More snow steps, then nothing. If we go outside to investigate, there will be no footprints. But one time the gate left marks in the snow from when it swung open. The lights in the laundry room. 2 or 3 times this happened. My mom was down in the basement doing laundry. She finished up, turned the lights off to the laundry room, and walked up the stairs. The moment that she took the first step into the laundry room, the light came back on. Terrified, she yelled for my dad to come down with her so that she wouldn't be alone to turn them back off. But once she was home alone, and she all but booked it up the stairs without touching them. My parents are huge on energy conservation. I always got scolded for leaving lights on. So this was out of character for her. The floating head. I was asleep in my room when I randomly woke up one night. Directly above me was a woman's disembodied head just staring at me. I stared at her for a few seconds to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. Then I hid underneath the blanket and went back to sleep. After I moved back in, my dad died last year from cancer. We started renovations with some of the money from his life insurance. Since then, activity is ramped up. I'm a night owl, and on weekends I might not go to sleep until 4 or 5 a.m. One night it's 3 a.m. I'm walking through the pitch black house to my room. I pass the living room and a car drives by, just as I do, and the lights through the window alert me to the dark human shadow limping through the living room. I pause for a moment because when my dad was alive, he often got really bad, painful leg cramps in the middle of the night, and he'd pace around the living room to try to work them out. Sometimes I'd hear him from downstairs and come up and just get him some water, make sure he was okay. So he dies, and then I see this. and I just couldn't deal with it. I noped out and just bolted from my room. I slept with the light on. I got a puppy at the beginning of September. He's a little ball of fluff, and I love him. Last week, he was sleeping beside my bed. I've been banished to the basement while my room gets a new rug and paint, and he jumps awake at 3:40 a.m. and starts raising hell, barking and growling. He seems focused on the center of the room, and it takes me a good while to work up the courage to turn on a light. But when I do, of course, nothing is there. Gambit calms down and brings his ball to an empty chair that we had brought down from the kitchen, which was getting new linoleum. Half of the kitchen and my bedroom are in the basement at the moment. He nudges it forward, then lays down and wags his tail like he wants to play. I turn on all the lights and get no sleep that night. 2 weeks ago, I jolt awake at 3 a.m. I'm groggy, half asleep, and there's a shadow right at the foot of my bed. Still in the basement, by the way. The shadow would be the perfect height of a grown adult if they were kneeling by the bed. The shoulders were quite broad, but it was just black, pure black, like a void. There's very little natural light coming into the basement at 3 a.m., but I can see how much it contrasts to the rest of the darkness. I stare at it, trying to figure out what it is. I sit up and lean forward, wondering why it isn't moving. I'm half asleep, remember? I try to touch it, but that doesn't work either. I slowly wake up and realize that, hey, maybe trying to touch the black void is a bad idea. So I roll over and go back to sleep, which seems to be my solution to all hauntings. There's more, like hearing voices and the pitter-patter of children's feet upstairs when it's 2 a.m. and no children in the house. The voices are rarely distinguishable. It always sounds like a muffled conversation is happening 2 rooms away. Although sometimes I think I've heard my name. My mom claims she feels someone in bed with her when there isn't. The bed will dip, like someone sat down or something. She's also seen shadows at the foot of her bed, but she says that she can't move when she does, where I can. So I wonder if she has sleep paralysis.